And now what is happened after the coup and Sheikh Hasina's eviction from Bangladesh is that we are now witnessing the recreation of East Pakistan. So what is the objective of all this? This has been done by the US. Okay, there is no doubt about it that the Americans are behind this. It's not because the students were protesting on the streets. She had to leave the country because the army gave her a 45-minute deadline. So the real power doesn't lie with the students on the streets, it lies with the armed forces of Bangladesh. But now the question is, now that this has happened, will the students form the government?
Let's go to Trump's assassination attempt. Some people are saying even that was doctored, but I would say Trump wouldn't risk it.
No.
Do you think the US deep state wanted Trump killed? Israel is in an active, full frontal war with its neighbors. What do we make of all of this? And what is Iran's role in this? A country that does not even share a border with Israel. We will move to Israel-Palestine. When I was first seeing the events of October 7th, just like me, the entire world was up in shock. We also saw the famous Instagram image, which I think was clearly a PR stunt. Influencers were paid to put up that image.
Indian influencers. So many problems that need to be sorted out. The number one problem that is hampering and ailing India is corruption. The entire nation essentially, allegedly, kind of runs on corruption. You have to lubricate every single step of the way with money to get things done. Why is it so?
Abhijit Chavda, my good friend, the world needs your geopolitical advice. As the world rips itself apart in wars, asylums, protests, geopolitical skirmishes, you name it, this is probably the most interesting time for astrologers to make predictions, for people who short stocks to make a lot of profit, and for people who are essentially, plotting to start their own governments or overthrow some governments. So I want to start with something very essential. In my living life as a 27-year-old, I've never come across Bangladesh unrest in a way which is indicative of Sheikh Hasina's dethroning as the head of state and moving across into India. I want to go into the what, why, and how of Sheikh Hasina's departure from Bangladesh.
Yeah.
She was appointed prime minister, I think 15 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. What led to the events that got her evicted from her own country?
Right. There's a lot to unpack in there. This is a story that's unfolding as we speak right now. She just reached India, I think, a couple of days ago. She had to flee from her nation, and she's the democratically elected prime minister of the nation, and she's been overthrown. And so first of all, why did she get overthrown is the question. Well, if you look at the actual mechanics of the overthrow, how did the coup happen? It's not because the students were protesting on the streets. She had to leave the country because the army gave her a 45-minute deadline. So the real power doesn't lie with the students on the streets, it lies with the armed forces of Bangladesh, the police and the armed forces. So as long as the police and the armed forces were supporting her, she was in power. The moment the armed forces switch allegiance from her to something else, that's when she is forced to leave the country. And I would say that she is very fortunate that she was able to leave the country unhurt, unscathed. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of Indian involvement in that, in her coming out unharmed. So what's happened right now? There's been a coup in Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina is gone. There is talk of an interim government, and Mohammed Yunus, who is a very well-known Western supporter, he could be the interim prime minister of some kind. It's still very much in motion, all the pieces. But what is now happening is that the opposition parties, the opposition is now in power, essentially. And what that means is that Bangladesh now goes back to the pre-1971 model. We are witnessing the re-emergence of East Pakistan at our eastern frontier. That's what's happening. And if you look at the chain of events that led to this coup, it's very clear that this is nothing but one of those color revolutions that the West so specializes in. Color revolutions have happened in various parts of the world. The Americans have perfected the process of the color revolution. And if you look at the events, the chain of events, the American fingerprints are all over this matter. So Sheikh Hasina herself has taken the unprecedented step of making multiple allegations about the US, that the Americans they want to create an artificial Christian nation out of parts of Bangladesh, parts of Burma, and parts of India. And they told her that if she allowed this to happen, then they would not oppose her in her re-election bid in the elections that happened earlier this year. And they also want a Bangladeshi island, which is called Saint Martin's Island, apparently, which is off the southern coast of Bangladesh, near Burma. And they want to create a military base there, a naval base, air force base, and militant training base, etc. They want that. So that would give them a tremendous amount of power projection capabilities in the Bay of Bengal, right off the coast of India, and that can also target China. So the Americans wanted all this, and she refused to give them this, and that's why eventually she's been overthrown. And the process of overthrow is very simple. You create a students' movement. Okay, in the subcontinent, all the academic systems are, all the higher academia, the school system, all of that is in English medium. I mean, if you want to be anything in life, you have to speak good English. So it's all English medium based. And all these academics, they are somehow or the other on the payroll or under the influence of the West. And so it's very easy to activate these assets and create an artificial movement among the students. You know,
So they're academic sleeper cells.
Yeah, academic sleepers. You have the same thing in India. Okay, if you look at the university departments, all the humanities, they are very, very left-oriented. They're very anti-India, and they're essentially some assets that can be activated at any time. So an artificial students movement was created, and students are idealistic kids, okay? It's not like they're bad people. You take any issue that is of some relevance, and you say that the government is doing the wrong thing, and you portray the prime minister as a dictator, you inflame the emotions, and then you can unleash hundreds of thousands of students on the streets. And that gives the legitimacy to the eventual overthrow, because the media can then spin the students' protests as a legitimate expression of the downtrodden people of the country. Yeah. And the students are being brutalized. You can spin any story.
As a victory of the young over the old.
Exactly. But now the question is, now that this has happened, will the students form the government? Who's going to form the government? I mean, if the students have genuinely overthrown the government, then they should form the government. The prime minister should be one of the students. The foreign minister, the home minister, they should all be students, representatives. But you're going to have Mohammed Yunus, who's going to be flown in from the West. He's going to be parachuted into Bangladesh. Nobel Peace Prize winner, Magsaysay Award probably, I'm not sure. All the various accolades that you can get from the West, he has got those. He is very closely related to the Clinton Foundation, whatnot. So he's going to now become the prime minister. And you already hear about all these atrocities that have been unleashed against the minority Hindu population of Bangladesh. When Bangladesh was formed in 1971, the Hindu population was 22%. Now it's less than 8%, maybe 7% or so. And they are being brutalized right now. And you may see an exodus of them into India, but we have sealed our borders with Bangladesh, as we should. So there's a humanitarian crisis unfolding over there. So essentially, the unfinished business of 1971. See, what happened in 1971 is that the Pakistanis were in East Pakistan, the Pakistani army was conducting a genocide. Okay, it is well known. Read the book, The Blood Telegram, in which the US ambassador documents what's happening there. Okay, so it's not something I'm pulling out of my hat, let's say. Okay, so there was a genocide that was happening. And then
a genocide of who exactly?
The Hindus.
Okay.
The Hindus and whoever was opposing the Pakistani regime. There was a brutal genocide happening. Millions, I don't know, at least 1 million people were killed. 250,000 women were raped at least, and so on. And that's why there was this big flood of refugees into India. Millions of refugees had to pour into India. And eventually the Pakistanis attacked India militarily, which is why India had to conduct the military operation in 1971. So the Americans were aware of the genocide. Nixon and Kissinger were aware of it, and they wanted it to proceed. And India, with the help of the USSR, was able to liberate East Pakistan, create Bangladesh. We did not reabsorb that nation into India, which has always been part of India. It was out of India for just 20 odd years at the time of 1971, 24 years or so. We could have reabsorbed it, but we did not reabsorb it. And then what happens is that the Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Bonga Bandhu, who is considered to be the father of Bangladesh, the founding father or so, he gets assassinated. His entire family is wiped out. Only his daughter Sheikh Hasina and her husband and kids who were outside the country were not killed. So just a few years, very soon after the 71 liberation of Bangladesh, there is a reverse. The nation reverts to army rule. There is generals ruling the country. There was Muhammad Irshad, who was in power until the 90s. After he is deposed, there is a very hard-line Islamist government that comes to power, which is the Khaleda Zia, who was very, very strongly anti-India. So India lost control of the things in Bangladesh very rapidly after 71. So the victory turned out to be a hollow victory. We should have reabsorbed it. It was our land. It was ours by right of conquest, but we let it go. And now what is happened after the coup and Sheikh Hasina's eviction from Bangladesh is that we are now witnessing the recreation of East Pakistan. So what is the objective of all this? This has been done by the US. Okay, there is no doubt about it that the Americans are behind this. You will not see it documented anywhere, but if you look at the events and who's behind this, the Americans meeting Sheikh Hasina and demanding...
It's very evident because Biden's office has just released a statement that he will not be offering any asylum to Sheikh Hasina, and UK has also complied.
Yes, the UK is a stooge of the US. It's very well known, and they have also refused to condemn the ousting of power of a democratically elected leader of a country. And they have said that we have noted what's happening, and we would like the peaceful transition of whatever it is, and they are supporting this Mohammed Yunus. So they are behind this. It's very clear. So what are they trying to achieve is the question. What does it mean for India? So by reconverting Bangladesh into East Pakistan, first of all, we have another hostile neighbor to our east.
Yeah.
The same way we have a hostile neighbor to the west, Pakistan. In Pakistan also a couple of years there was a coup. Imran Khan was ousted. Imran Khan was trying to be pro-Beijing. And now a very strongly pro-US regime is in power in Pakistan.
Shahbaz Sharif?
Shahbaz Sharif, and actually it's a general. Shahbaz Sharif is just the puppet. Okay, he's the figurehead. So you have a very pro-US and anti-India government in Pakistan. Now we have the same thing in East Pakistan, which was formerly Bangladesh. I now call it East Pakistan. And the Americans also want to create an artificial Christian nation out of parts of Bangladesh, out of parts of Burma. There is a civil war happening in Burma, which has been unleashed by the Americans, and out of parts of the Indian states of Manipur and Mizoram.
So question then, what I understand that Americans use Christianity to exert influence. How will they do that in Bangladesh when most of the population is Muslim?
That is a very relevant question, very pertinent question, and I'm glad you asked it. So when it comes to the southern part of Bangladesh, the Chittagong hill tracts, there was a majority Hindu Buddhist population there. Over the past 30-40 years, they have been persecuted and they have been turned into a minority. But there is also a significant population of a certain ethnic group called the Cookies. Okay, in various parts of
we
southern
also have the
Bangladesh.
Cookies here in India, right?
Yeah, let's talk about the Cookies. We'll come to that. So the Cookies are a non-Burmese ethnic group. Okay, we think of them as originating in Burma, but they don't speak the Burmese language. They don't respect Burmese culture or customs. They're fighting the Burmese government in a big civil war right now. They were fighting the Bangladeshi government in a civil war there as well. And they have unleashed mayhem in Manipur since May last year. So they are fighting three nations. And the objective, if you look at their Twitter accounts and their old tweets, it's always been Cookie Land for Christ, a new artificial nation for this Cookie ethnic group. And so the Americans are behind this. Okay, it's very clear if you look at what's the events that are happening in Burma. There was a coup in Burma. Do you remember? A coup in about 2021. So why was there a coup? Aung San Suu Kyi was in power.
Yes.
Right? She was in power.
The one who was on house arrest and who was fasting forever, that woman?
That lady who has a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Okay? And she is the democratic voice of the Burmese people, apparently. And she was in power. She was the leader of Burma, and she was ousted in 2021 by the military junta, by the Burmese army. Why did they have to do this? So you go back a couple of years, there were these apparently spontaneous students' protests and demonstrations in Thailand. Now, what does Thailand have to do with this? Right? See, everything in this region is interconnected, and there's one power behind this all. So whenever there are apparently spontaneous students' protests, where you have students coming out of universities and protesting, English-speaking students and all, it's generally not quite spontaneous. So these students' protests in Thailand in 2020-21, they were anti-government protests and also anti-monarchy protests, which is unprecedented. So what was happening is that the Americans wanted the Cookies to start this civil war situation in Burma, but where would they get the arms and ammunition from? China won't provide them because the Chinese support the Burmese military government, the military junta. So the Americans wanted to create this front against the Burmese military junta. So they had to funnel in arms and ammunition via Thailand. Thailand shares a long border with Burma. And that would eventually affect India because the overall objective is India. I'll come to that, the India angle soon. So they wanted the arms and ammunition to be funneled into Burma via Thailand, and probably the Thai government must have resisted that because they have no enmity with Burma or India.
Yeah, they're a hospitality first country. They don't want to be associated, to be known as an armed power.
And they have no reason to support this terrorist group, the Cookies, and and create whatever. So I think there must have been some kind of resistance from the government. That's why the student protests were unleashed. And in 2021, the student protests suddenly die out spontaneously, which means that the Thai government must have bent its knee. And that's when the Burmese junta takes power in a coup in Burma, because now they can see the influx of arms and ammunition to Burma. So they realize if Aung San Suu Kyi stays in power, she will actually help the US achieve their objectives much faster.
Hence the Nobel Prize.
Hence the Nobel Prize and whatever else, right? So the Burmese government takes power, but regains power, regains control in what they call a coup. And then there is a civil war that is unleashed in Burma. Right now, the Burmese government, the Burmese military, is in control of less than half the nation in Burma. Large parts of northern Burma, western Burma, etc., are no longer in the control of the Burmese government, of the Burmese military. And it's a bunch of ethnic groups that are fighting the Burmese government for various causes. And you will see Western Baptist missionaries baptizing them while they are fighting and so on.
Yeah, because you need a religious cause to
unify them.
Instill fervor in your troops.
All that. So, and then in 2023, you have the sudden unleashing of violence and mayhem in Manipur. Okay, so now India is being targeted, and there is this apparently endless supply of arms and ammunition. If a ragtag bunch of tribals, Kuki tribals, are fighting the people of Manipur, indigenous people, and the government of India, where are they getting so much arms and ammunition from? They have mortars, they have rocket launchers, they have millions of rounds of ammunition. Where does it come from? It comes from Burma, and the Burmese part of the operation is receiving these arms and ammunition from somewhere else, perhaps from Thailand. I'm not sure, but it looks like it's Thailand. So what are the Americans trying to do? They are trying to create an artificial Christian nation on India's eastern frontier to cut off India's access to Southeast Asia by land access. See, if you look at the western part of India, our thousands of years historical access to Eurasia, Central Asia, has been cut off by Pakistan. We can't even reach Afghanistan by road anymore.
Right.
In the north of India, Chinese occupied Tibet is what we have, and the Chinese have cut off India's access to everything else. And now in the eastern frontier of India, you have East Pakistan forming again, and you will have a Kuki land, which will cut off India's access to Southeast Asia and the rest of East Asia, which means India is essentially landlocked. And the only option we have to travel anywhere else is either by sea or by air. The world's oceans are controlled by the number one hegemon, the only superpower, which is the US. And the world's the airwaves, or whatever you want to call it, the all that is also controlled by the Americans. So that puts India completely at the mercy of the superpower. Now, why are they targeting India? I mean, aren't we friends with the Americans?
I was going to say that.
Exactly. We are friends with the Americans. We are democracies. We are the world's largest democracy. They are the world's oldest democracy.
We do so many bilateral talks. We show shows of strength. We talk about our unity, the similarity
of our cultures. We have shared
cultures.
values, apparently.
Yeah.
So why are they targeting us, the Americans? I'll tell you why. India is the only large economy that is projected to keep growing the next 20, 30 years. There is no factor that will stop India's growth, economic growth. So imagine India keeps growing at 7-8% roughly, let's say, per year over the next 20 years. That means that by a 2040 or so horizon, India will very much be a $10-15 trillion economy. And when you have an economy of that size, you're a whole different beast.
Yeah.
The Americans tried some skullduggery in Hong Kong protests and all that. Now, China is not India. India is a $4 trillion economy. China is what, 20? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Just second to US.
The US. The Chinese were able to clamp down on that, and the Americans couldn't do much. But India is a tiny $4 trillion economy. We are way smaller. They can bully us and push us around in all kinds of ways. But if India becomes a $15-20 trillion economy, India won't be that easy to manipulate and push around. So the problem the US sees when it comes to India is that India could be very much, despite all its flaws and deficiencies, internal problems, India could be the next China by 2040, 2050 horizon. And they don't want a new competitor emerging. They've already made a huge mistake with China by aiding and abetting and midwifing the rise of China. And China is now a big economic rival, not a military rival, economic rival. So they don't want the same thing to happen with India. And India is not a Western nation. We have our own ethos. We have our own culture. We are still steadfastly refusing to let what they call paganism die out. So that we haven't bent the knee from that perspective. So India could be a big problem for them in the future. They think long term. They are the only superpower in the world, and superpowers are jealous about what they have. They will not let it go away so easily. So they don't want India to rise. So instead of India growing at 7-8% per year, what if India just grows at 4% per year the next 20 years?
What if you have almost a state of war across with your neighbors? What if your neighbors turn hostile?
You don't even need to have a state of war with your neighbors. You just need to be cut off from the rest of the world, okay? And then you can create create artificial problems within the nation. So the Americans allegedly have a program called subnational diplomacy. So subnational diplomacy. So their embassy, their consulates in various parts of India, they allegedly engage with certain political parties in India that allegedly have pro-US, pro-West, anti-India tendencies.
Yeah.
They allegedly engage with certain state governments, that allegedly have differences with the central government. And by doing so, they create rifts within the country. And they will exacerbate these fault lines. They will divide the things further. They also have a significant amount of investment, or let's say assets, when it comes to the Indian academic system and various other Indian institutions, allegedly. And they can unleash all of this and explore all of this going forward. So what I foresee the next 3, 4, 5 years is that the Americans will probably take advantage of all the assets they've developed within India the past few years, the past 20, 30 years, since 1991, essentially, when they started infiltrating the country. And they will try to slow down India's economic growth. They will create rifts and fights within India. We're going to see student demonstrations in India. The same kind of demonstration that you saw in Thailand, the same kind of thing that you saw in in Bangladesh. It won't be a coup kind of situation. It will be just about the nation being on the boil. Turmoil everywhere. Protest about this. So you essentially paralyze the whole nation.
You really think we're going to have students from reputed institutions with adjunct American professors, or
no, you don't need American professors for that.
You could just have a shitty 4 BHA college also.
Oh yes,
getting up in arms. Q. And what would be the case? What would be something that these students,
any cause, any grievance, anything,
just disrupt the.
Remember the farmers' protests?
Yes.
Well, do you think that happened spontaneously?
No, not at all.
There's been so many. They've done some, let's say, pilot projects in the past in India, okay?
With moderate success.
With a minimum viable product. They've seen that it can work. MVP.
Yeah.
And now they can replicate the model in various other parts of India. So I see this happening in the future. I see more of this happening in the next 5 years. That's where we are right now. So we have the potential to become a very major economic power. We have the potential to surpass China by 2050. And that is something the Americans don't want to happen. They know how to deal with China. Their economy and the Chinese economy are joined at the hip because of manufacturing and whatnot.
Right.
Okay. The Americans make this constant hue and cry about China. China is the bad guy. China is the. They don't fear China.
Yeah.
China is an economic rival, but the real nation they fear and they don't talk about that is Russia, because Russia is a near superpower. It is a gigantic country. It has all the resources anybody could ask for. They don't need to import anything from anywhere. It's an autarky. It produces everything it needs. And it has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And that is the nation the Americans genuinely fear.
Wait, it has more nukes than America does?
It does. It has more nuclear warheads than the Americans do. And they have means of delivering those packages, gift packages, wherever they want in the world at a moment's notice. So that is what the Americans really fear. They don't fear China. The Chinese don't have enough nukes to destroy the world. The Russians do. So the Americans actually fear Russia. And India has a good equation with Russia. We have a significant comfort level with Russia. We have absolutely no points of contention or hostility with Russia whatsoever. And it's essentially a win-win kind of cooperation kind of thing. The only reason why India and Russia, we don't have very strong and very close ties right now is because of the Ukraine situation and the Western hostility against Russia. Because if India goes too close to Russia, they may impose sanctions upon us also. The Americans. So that's why India is right now what India is doing is a very delicate tightrope balancing. That's what India is doing. You can't go too much on this side. You can't go too much on that side. It's going to be a very rough, very tough 10, 20 years going ahead for India. If we play our cards right, and if we balance things out, we may end up becoming the second largest economy in the world. Once we reach the $10-15 trillion mark, we can't be bullied. Right now, we can be bullied. We are not powerful enough.
Yeah.
So this is the time when they can prevent us, make sure that we can never reach that $10-15 trillion mark.
So let's talk about India's foreign policy then. Well, the way you've described this so far, it seems to me that no matter what we're projected abroad, we are still in dire straits because this is like a surprise. We weren't expecting the fall of Bangladesh. From what I know, Sheikh Hasina has been an ally of New Delhi for a very long time. She even had her asylum here.
Well, I actually did expect the fall of Bangladesh. I put out a video on the 4th of November 2023 outlining exactly what happened day before yesterday.
Yeah.
So I could see that happening.
What did you foresee?
I foresaw that the US would carry out a regime change operation in Bangladesh and remove Sheikh Hasina from power.
Yeah, see, one would assume that the US could, as a layman, one would assume that the US could probably do regime changes in shithole countries like Nicaragua or like countries where, it's like low stakes, too far away from important neighbors strategically. But to do it right in our armpit, to right on the right side of India, is almost like an insult. It's like saying you can't do anything with your neighbors. So my real question then is, and this is what is being raised against the Indian foreign policy, people are on Twitter bashing Dr. Jaishankar, saying for all the multiple European conferences you do, for all the edits that people cut out of you as this bold and fearless foreign affairs, external affairs minister, you couldn't stop this coup, right? So what can India do now with a foreign policy or with a retaliation move?
Okay, multiple things to unpack here. We'll talk about Dr. Jaishankar in a moment. What does the fall of Bangladesh represent for us? For us, it's kind of like Russia's Crimea moment. So the coup in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, which happened, it is almost exactly the same as the Euromaidan coup in Ukraine. 2014, was it? And in which the democratically elected government of Ukraine was overthrown unconstitutionally and a pro-Western puppet was put in place, in power, in Ukraine in 2014.
Right.
And in response to that, what does Russia do? It annexes Crimea. So that is what because now that Ukraine has fallen, it means that US influence is right at Russia's border now, officially. So that is a red line that the Americans crossed, and that's why the Crimea thing happened. And now the Ukraine war has happened in 2022 onwards. I think that Mr. Putin actually missed a few tricks, and he should have done that earlier. From his perspective, from a pure game theory or whatever perspective, from the strategy, from the logic of strategy. So this is India's Euromaidan moment, essentially. We had a very strongly, very, very friendly government in Dhaka, and now the tables have turned, and you have an equally hostile government that's coming to power in Dhaka. What does India do? It is going to have national security implications for us. The new regime in Bangladesh will again start training and giving support to anti-India separatist outfits in the far east of India, northeast of India, which used to happen before Sheikh Hasina was in power.
So there is an influx of terrorism.
You will have that happening. You're going to see that happening. And the Siliguri corridor could come under pressure. That 50-kilometer sliver of land that connects the far east of India with the so-called mainland of India. So one thing India could do if we have the cojones is we widen the Siliguri corridor. And we also take back the Chittagong hill tracks, which will make it very difficult for the Americans to establish a naval base right off that. But it takes a tremendous amount of rocks to do that. And is India in a position to do that? You do that, the Americans will impose economic sanctions on you and reduce your economy to the level of Venezuela or Cuba.
Really?
Oh, of course.
You don't think we're still at that level where we can sustain ourselves? What I really ask then is, we just say, okay, clearly there is a hostile government. We can impose sanction on Bangladesh. Let us not do any trades with them, right? Yeah. Let us treat them the way they are. But in the off chance we attack them, what happens then?
So if we take some land and widen the Siliguri corridor by taking some Bangladeshi territory, and let's say we take back the Chittagong hill tracts area, which should never have been part of East Pakistan. If you do that, the Americans will accuse India of being an expansionist, hegemonic nation.
Yeah, as if they're not.
Yeah, they're not. But the rules are different for them and for us. So they will accuse us of following Putin's playbook.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they will impose sanctions on us, which will devastate our economy. Yeah. The Americans have the means to devastate any nation's economy apart from that of Russia. Okay, so that is something we can't have right now. It is not in our interest to have that happen. So we're going to have to keep quiet and swallow this, which means that we are now on the back foot. Okay. The other question you asked was about Dr. Jaishankar. Look, the strength of your foreign policy at the end of the day, it depends on the strength of your economy and your military. Now, our economic strength is okay we are a $4 trillion economy, and our military strength is okay. We are a reasonably good defensive power. We aren't as far as I can see, we aren't really in a position where we can retake Tibet, for example. If the Prime Minister tomorrow says, go and take back Tibet in a week, I'm not sure if we can do that. Maybe we can, perhaps. Maybe we can. But I don't think that we are there yet. We can certainly, destroy Pakistan if we have to. We can do that.
We can?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, we can.
And you don't think the foreign powers who fund Pakistan will intervene?
Of course they'll intervene. That's why we can't. That's why Pakistan still exists. See, Pakistan is an artificial temporary nation.
Yeah.
The moment the foreign benevolent hand over them is taken away, they'll fragment.
You have completely dismantled any opinions, any positive geopolitical opinions I had of the US. And with your very apparent, outlining of how the US is complicit in this, it seems to me that, one option is for India to sit back. The other is perhaps take some inspiration from our Israeli friends and fight wars. But
the Israelis, okay, let's ask ourselves, why were the Israelis able to fight so many wars?
No, but before we do that, I just want to ask about expansionism.
Yeah.
India has never been traditionally expansionist,
No.
yes or no?
No.
What will propel us to be expansionist? Is it, and I'm speaking simply as an emotional Indian, I'm riled up now. Can we not be expansionist when we see that?
We can.
Yeah.
But the question is when? What are the necessary conditions that we need to have in India for us to think about, let's say, expanding somewhere?
Some Akhand Bharat type stuff.
Yeah. How do we do that? You need to be powerful enough. So right now, if you look at the subcontinent, you can construct a hard power score for each nation. Okay, based on various factors, open source factors, economic strength, military strength, so on and so forth, etc., power projection capabilities, all that. You add all of that together, and you can construct an equation. You can make an equation which spits out a hard power score for each nation in the world, essentially. So India's hard power score is about 4.91. Okay, in my calculation. Pakistan is 0.5 or something. Bangladesh is 2, 0.3, something like that. So if you look at the subcontinent, India is the most powerful nation. To our north, we have a power which is about 17 on the hard power scale. 17.
Really?
Which is China.
So we're like nothing compared to them.
So China is about more than 3 times more powerful than us overall.
Yeah.
Total cumulative hard power. The next most powerful nation is Russia at 54. 54, China is 17. And the US is 94. So India is 4.9, the US is 94, China is 17, Russia is 54. That tells you the stark disparity in asymmetry in power. But in the Asiatic region, there are 2 major powers, India and China. India is about roughly 4.9 and China is whatever I said. So in the subcontinent, India is the most powerful nation. But we have to remember that India is not the most powerful nation in the subcontinent because Pakistan and Bangladesh are proxies of a way more powerful nation, the US.
And they are complete proxies.
Absolute proxies.
So they have no inkling or no shrivel of being self-directed or self-governed.
No. The people may have aspirations to be genuinely sovereign, etc.
But that's the nation's conscience. It doesn't translate into...
No, because you need to know how power works. Power at the end of the day is the ability to unleash violence on demand. That is what power is. As simple as that. Mao Zedong said that political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. Why was Sheikh Hasina ousted? She did not flee the country as long as the army was on her side. The moment the army sells itself out and betrays the nation, she has to flee the nation at 45 minutes notice. So the real power in any government, in any nation, lies within the armed forces and the police forces. And whoever controls them, controls the nation. So how does a coup happen? When the army switches allegiance.
Yeah.
Okay? So when it comes to Pakistan, the army is entirely beholden to the US. Okay? Their generals have families and investments all across London, US, whatever. Okay? When it comes to other nations, same thing. The Sri Lankans were at a time beholden to the Chinese, the Rajapaksas, etc. We know what happened there. And Aung San Suu Kyi has family in the UK, in Burma. So you will see all these connections. So India is a nation in the subcontinent that is surrounded by proxies of other nations. Nepal, unfortunately, is kind of a proxy of China today.
Yeah, it used to be ours.
It used to be ours. They are all people. We still have open borders with them. But our government in the 1990s allowed a Maoist takeover of Nepal, and that essentially pushed Nepal into the Chinese embrace. So Nepal is kind of, the political class is very pro-China in Nepal, mostly. So Nepal is, you could say, a Chinese proxy to some extent, or to a large extent. Bangladesh and Pakistan are US proxies. Burma could become a US proxy if cookie land is carved out of it. Sri Lanka is, well, you could say it's kind of pro-US right now. Pro-US.
But does India not wield influence on Sri Lanka?
We do wield some influence, but if what hits the fan, shit hits the fan, it could be pro-US.
Yeah, also the US is more capital, right? That's what it comes down to.
They have the deepest pockets. And they can always unleash that. And the Maldives are pro-China. So we are surrounded. We are encircled just like Russia is encircled. We don't realize it. So now that we understand these hard, basic, harsh fundamentals of geopolitical life, where it all depends on how powerful you are, and it's the rule of the jungle apart from that. So then you have to ask yourself, how powerful is India's foreign policy? Our foreign policy is only as powerful as the amount of hard power we have. Because that is the only leverage that you can use behind closed doors when you negotiate.
So you can't bluff like in a poker game. You can't do stuff like, you can randomly attack Pakistan and then hope that your bluff won't be called.
You have to think about second, third, fourth, fifth order effects. And those are going to be the nasty ones. Because it's going to bring in foreign powers. And you're going to have all kinds of effects unleashed upon you from outside, not from Pakistan, but from elsewhere. So the moment you attack someone's proxy, that's when they start getting involved in this. And then they can devastate you with
So let's talk about Narendra Modi then. Narendra Modi is in his third term right now. As far as I can remember, he hasn't had to deal with too much international skirmish beyond the Pulwama attacks and the Uri surgical strikes, mostly with Pakistan. And then some incursions were made in Arunachal Pradesh from China, right? But would you say this is going to be his toughest geopolitical battle? Because now he really has to be not only a prime minister for all of India's internal issues, but also someone who protects the nation from these new powers coming in.
Absolutely. So Mr. Modi definitely faces the toughest challenge of his life. First of all, it's the first time ever that he is governing without a full majority. He has been Chief Minister of Gujarat on 3 different occasions, 3 consecutive occasions, and he had a full majority each time. Then the first 2 terms that he served as India's Prime Minister, he had a big majority. Today, he is part of a coalition government. So that is one thing that's already, you could say to some extent, may hamper him. And secondly, now we are seeing the actual encircling of India, which was not apparent probably to most people earlier. But now you can see that the only neighbor that was pro-India has been taken out. And it's been turned into a proxy of a hostile power. So today, Mr. Modi faces the toughest challenge of his life. And the question is, what does he do about it? What can he do about this? We cannot, declare war and attack whatever nation. We can't. We are not in a position to do that. If there was no foreign influence in the subcontinent, we could have done that. But the subcontinent is this geopolitical chessboard right now. So Mr. Modi can't do that. So what can Mr. Modi do? The Manipur problem, millions, lakhs of cookies have illegally infiltrated into Manipur, and over half the state is occupied by them. If you look at satellite images over the past few years, you can see thousands of new villages cropping up over time. So that's what's happened, and that is clearly, you could say, an intelligence failure. But let's put that aside. The question is, what do you do about this? What does Mr. Modi do about this? Right now, I would say that Mr. Modi can only focus on the economic development of India. That's it. Right now,
just fill our pockets, make us strong.
Make the economy stronger, attract foreign investment, attract foreign capital, turn India into a major manufacturing hub, and tie our economy with the major economies of the world, so that destroying India would be harmful to them as well. Right now, what's happening is that the world is looking at options and alternatives beyond China, because China and the US are now embroiled in a major trade war and all that. So the nations of the world, the major consuming nations of the world, want manufacturing to happen beyond China. Now, if we don't get our things right, then all those opportunities will go to nations like Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. So
who are ready and hungry would do it at a cheaper price.
Who will do that? Who are happy to do that? So we have to get our house in order so that we can attract. We essentially have to lay out the red carpet to anyone who wants to invest in India, not make them wait and stand in queue for filling out 50 different forms. So that is something that is completely within the hands of the Indian government.
So what you're saying is the way out of war and chaos is through economic prosperity.
Economic growth. Prosperity will come through growth. Our per capita GDP will increase as our cumulative GDP increases, which will happen if we become a major manufacturing power and exporter of various finished goods, not exporter of raw products, raw materials. So India needs to become a major manufacturing hub. India needs to become a major transportation hub. India needs to become a major tourism hub. All of that is very much within the powers of Mr. Narendra Modi and his ministers. India needs to become a major cultural tourism hub. So all these things we can do. And the way to become better at manufacturing is to ensure that our students are provided the right skills and so on. So the education system needs to be kind of tweaked, at least, if not...
more apprenticeship, more direct skill-based stuff that you can actually use
Exactly.
in real life.
I mean, why can't a student who just wants to work and manufacture stuff, why can't he or she become an apprentice and start doing actual work by the age of 16 or 17? Why wait until 23 until you have a master's degree or whatever?
Yeah.
You don't want to be an academic, then why do you need a master's degree? Get yourself a diploma and get to work.
Yeah.
So, and we need to obviously help the entrepreneurs and make things better for them so that they can do their business. I mean, it's so hard to do business in India. Every entrepreneur knows that. I mean, I'll not get into that. There's so many issues which can be resolved. So the geopolitical external threats that we are facing can only be resolved right now in the absence of India being a powerful nation by growing economically. So we need consistent economic growth, 7-8% per year, ideally, for the next 20 years. There is no short-term solution to what we are facing right now. Which means that we should not be embroiled in any major military conflict the next 20 years. Can we pull it off? That's the question.
Wow.
There is no short-term solution. People can get emotional all they want. They can rant and whatever all they want. But there is no short-term solution. The reality, the truth of the matter is that the Americans are way more powerful than us. The Chinese are way more powerful than us. Right now, I see some kind of signs of some kind of rapprochement perhaps happening between India and China.
You think we could be friends?
No, I don't think we can be friends. But we can reach some kind of understanding. Let's postpone the war for 10 years. That sort of understanding. In the meanwhile, we work together. That could help if we can pull that off.
See, all of this analysis has instilled in me a nationalistic fervor. So I will ask you this. What can someone like me, like a YouTuber, do to bolster this? Because we are in the business of conversations, in the business of opinions, in the business of narratives. What can we do to open the floodgates for economic prosperity? Should we just maybe speak with the world and tell them about how good India is?
So people like you and me, we can serve as ambassadors of India to the rest of the world. We speak in English mostly. I speak in English mostly. So if you do that, the rest of the world can get to hear what India thinks and what India really represents. That's one thing we can do. And the second thing entrepreneurs overall can do is generate employment. Because we have millions of graduates being unleashed every year into the market.
Yeah.
And there's not enough jobs. So we need to have entrepreneurs generating employment, which means that the government should make it easy for us to generate employment. They should not burden us with 50 different taxes and whatnot. I'm not against paying taxes. Of course, we should pay taxes, but simplify the tax regime.
Yeah.
Make it easy to pay taxes. Don't make it a burden and a chore.
Yeah. Have you seen how interesting it is that despite what America is doing here in our neighboring countries, it does provide deductions to its nation's most profitable entrepreneurs, tax deductions, so that they can, essentially, one, be wealthy and use the economy, help the economy, and also make jobs. I don't think we do the same for our rich people here in the country.
No, we ensure that they have to go elsewhere to greener pastures. Why do all the internet entrepreneurs, etc., why do they go off to places like Singapore and Dubai and whatnot? Why do they have to leave the country? There are so many Indian businesses that are incorporated in Singapore. Why is that? Why aren't they incorporated here? I mean, think about it. You want to get something manufactured. You go to China, they'll roll out a red carpet for you. Anything you want, you will be provided, and you can get land on demand. You can set up your factory once your investment is there, and you will have talented people working for you, highly skilled people working for you as soon as it is humanly possible. Over here, you want to do that. You're going to run into all kinds of red tape and bureaucracy. Land acquisition is so difficult. There are so many problems that need to be sorted out. The number one problem that is hampering and ailing India is corruption. Okay? The entire nation essentially, allegedly, kind of runs on corruption.
True.
You have to lubricate every single step of the way with money to get things done. Why is it so? Imagine if all that money is not wasted, all that time is not wasted, where would India reach? India would not be growing at 8%, India would be growing at 12-15% per year. So these things need to be addressed. Where is India's war on corruption? You can blame the foreigner all you want, but first look within at what you can do here. And that's something I really would like to see the conditions improve within India.
Yeah, because the foreigner is doing all of these things abroad in our neighborhood because he has put his house in order. He has eliminated corruption and reduced meritocracy to a way which is stellar.
Look, you have enemies, you have adversaries. They will do whatever they can because they can do it. If I conquer, it's because I can. If I don't conquer, it's because I can't. So you can't blame outsiders and foreigners for what they do. They are expected to do that. If the biggest sin in geopolitics is weakness. If you are weak, everybody is going to take advantage of you. So don't be weak is the simple answer.
That's true for life as well.
Exactly. That's why geopolitics applies to life. Okay. So the solution is don't be weak. And how do you not be weak? By looking inwards at your deficiencies and where things are going wrong. And you address that. And then you give yourself time. You want to become Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's going to take you 5 years. You won't become Arnold Schwarzenegger tomorrow. You're going to have to clean out your diet, your lifestyle, the amount of sleep that you have, whatever food you eat, everything. And then you have to go to gym twice a day, this many hours, and do it all properly. And then maybe in 5 years, you can be Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That's true.
So it is a process, but we have to begin the process somewhere. Have we begun the process is the question.
Which will now make me think about one small deviation, then we'll go back to we'll go to Israel and the Palestine conflict, and the rest of the nations involved in that. So obviously, CAA and NRC was very hotly debated when it was first considered rolling out. Abhi bhi puri tarah roll out hua nahi hai. What does the CAA and NRC law mean for the Hindus stuck in Bangladesh? Do you think we're going to be able to get them in? Is this a time when the law becomes useful? Yeah.
I'm not sure I've looked into the actual text of the law personally. So I'm not sure what the text says. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to give shelter, to give refuge to the Hindus who are currently facing all this barbaric persecution in Bangladesh? We know it's happening. The media is trying to hide it, but we can see it happening in real time if you go online on Twitter or X or whatever. Yeah. It's happening. The question the Indian government needs to ask itself is, do we want to give them refuge? If the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. Let them die. Marne do unko. Hamare log nahi hai. In that case, fine, bhul jao. But if the answer is yes, that we want to help them, we want to save them, then I would say that I don't care what law exists or doesn't exist. Find a way. Let's say that there is a certain text of the CAA, NRC, whatever, and maybe it is not applicable to Bangladesh. Does it mean that we just let it be? If you really want to save them, you get it done whichever way it's possible. So I don't care whether the text of the law says this or that or whatever. These are all unnecessary and pointless minutiae and details. If you really want to save them, you save them. That's it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now we will move to Israel-Palestine. Of course, when I was first seeing the events of October 7th, just like me, the entire world was up in shock, right? Initially, the attack was painted as a terrorist attack on Israel. Gradually, over time, we also saw the famous Instagram image, which I think was clearly a PR stunt, all eyes on Rafah. I know for several influencers who were paid to put up that image, right?
Indian influencers, particularly celebrities, lots of Bollywood celebrities.
Now, as time has gone on, the events of the war have become increasingly unclear. There are facts coming in from both sides. Overwhelmingly, my friends in the arts, my friends on the left here in India, think that an Israeli-induced genocide is happening in Palestine.
Okay.
Now, you speak to people who are pro-Israel, they think it's actually Israel doing what it historically has done. It's a very persecuted community of Jews. Whenever they're attacked, they fight with full force. So they think it's well within their means to inflict violence on Gaza. And if civilians die, they die. It's a complicated issue. On top of that, you have Iran. And I was looking at the map. Iran doesn't share a border with Israel, right? It's a little far away. And Lebanon, which does. Now, you would think Lebanon has been razed to the ground many, many times. Beirut is the city of nightlife and whatnot. And The only difference right now that I see between India and Israel is that India is in a soft, hostile war with its neighbors, right? Israel is in an active, full frontal war with its neighbors. What do we make of all of this? And what is Iran's role in this? A country that does not even share a border with Israel.
Right. So we have to unpack the entire West Asia situation. Before we do that, I'd like to ask a question to the audience. Why is it that Indians need to take sides in somebody else's war? Why is it so?
It's very cool to have a flag that is not your own on your profile picture.
The
Because it
only
shows
flag you should have on your profile is your own.
Yeah.
I don't get it. What is wrong with Indians? So there's a war happening, there's a conflict happening in some part of the world, which is not connected to your part of the world, essentially. And two sides are fighting it out. Why do we have to take one side or the other? What does it have to do with us, first of all? So I am a realist. I support India. The only interest that I seek is that of India. India's the Indian national interest. And if two sides are bashing it out, slugging it out in the whichever way, it has nothing to do with me. So I am neither anti-Israel, anti-whatever else, or pro-Israel and pro-whatever else. I am a neutral external observer. I am not emotionally invested in this matter. What makes me riled up is Indians getting emotionally invested in this. Why do you have to? Now, with that said, let's understand what's happening. October 7th, 8th, whatever happened, essentially the 50th anniversary of Israel's greatest intelligence failure, the Yom Kippur War. On the 50th anniversary of that war happening, you have this big terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas from Gaza. Was that an intelligence failure, first of all? The Israelis have this tremendous intelligence apparatus. They have the Mossad, which is the external intelligence agency. They have the Shin Bet, which is the internal intelligence agency. They have informers all over the ground within Gaza, within the West Bank.
They are intelligence personified across the world.
They are a surveillance state. They have everything. When it comes to the border with Gaza, they have all these remote controlled sensors, tripwires, whatnot. They have all the electronic equipment in the world. And these guys, they cut the wires, they come all the way into Israel and no one knows. How did nobody know? They came flying through those paragliders, motorized paragliders. How was that not noticed and detected? Were the Israelis sleeping? Or was it done deliberately? That's the first question we have to think of. So I don't know the answer to that. Maybe the Israeli intelligence apparatus has gone to sleep for one day. Maybe let's say it's the case. So the attack happens. And tremendous amount of Israeli civilians, innocent civilians are killed. Men, women, children, party goers, music concert, whatnot. Horrible scenes. A lot of these women are taken as hostages and terrible things ensue. Now the Israelis, in response to this, naturally retaliate and essentially they start bombarding Gaza, from where the attack originated. And now the media goes into action, and some part of the media take this side and some take that side.
Right.
My point is, it's none of my concern. Okay? There is no right or wrong in geopolitics. There is no good or bad in geopolitics. Everybody does what they can to pursue and further their national interests.
Correct.
That's how it is. Now, obviously, Hamas is known to be, you can say, a proxy of Iran. Okay? Hamas is based out of Gaza. Okay, and there is something called Hezbollah, which is based out of Lebanon, which is to the north of Israel.
Right.
There is a shared border, a mountainous border with Israel, between Israel and Lebanon. And Hezbollah is another Iranian proxy, which is based out of Lebanon. There's a third Iranian proxy, it is alleged, called the Houthis, the Yemenis, who carry out various attacks on shipping in the Red Sea region, etc.
Yeah.
And then there are significant Iranian proxies in Iraq. Iraq is almost 50% Shia, by the way. Okay?
Now?
It's always been that way.
Okay.
I mean, not always.
I was just doing my due diligence on Iraq as well. ISIL has been wiped out from there.
Well, when we talk about ISIL, ISIS, where did this spring out of? Like mushrooms after the rain, they just emerge out of nowhere? How does a fully functional organization with multiple layers of leadership and foot soldiers and equipment and procurement and logistics, how does it emerge out of nowhere, fully formed? So ISIL is another manifestation of something else, of a foreign power.
I would assume the US again.
Yes, it is alleged it is the US that has created ISIL, Al-Qaeda, all that.
Yeah.
And sometimes ISIS is the bad guys, sometimes they're the good guys, sometimes
it's
they're
so
the moderate
weird.
extremists.
Yeah, I think I saw a statement ISIL condemning Hamas, which I was like,
Would you believe it?
yeah, I couldn't believe it, of course.
Yeah. So there is that. So in Iraq also you have significant Iranian proxies. Qasim Soleimani was involved in Iraq. He was involved in other parts of West Asia as well, but he was taken out in a drone strike in Baghdad. Right? So he was on his way on to some mission in Iraq. So Iran, Persia, our neighbor, okay, temporarily not a neighbor, but generally a neighbor of India, they are a geopolitically ambitious nation. And a very active nation. They have power projection capabilities way beyond their shores. Okay, so they have a habit of punching way above their height or their weight. India is a soft state. We punch way below our weight. And little Persia, Iran, they punch way above their weight. They have operations in various parts of West Asia. They have proxies in various parts of West Asia. And they essentially seek the destruction of Israel.
Why is that? Why are they pitted against Israel?
It's a religious thing.
That's it.
Well, Israel, if you look at their worldview, whether it is Iran or whether it is the various anti-Israel factions in the region, their worldview is that Israel is an artificial nation that was created by the West in what is called Palestine. Okay, so if you look at the history of the place, the Jewish people, they came out of Judea, etc., in that region about 2,500-3,000 years before today. So it is the place of origin of the Judaic people, of the Hebrew people, and the Jewish religion, all that. That's 2,000-3,000 years ago. And then there's this entire history. They were taken captive by the Assyrians, and the Persian king Kurush, Cyrus, he is the one who saved them. And that's why you have Jews even in Iran, even today. Yeah, there are small.
Are they persecuted? I'm sure they must be persecuted.
Probably not. Probably not too much. Okay, it depends on which side you're looking at,
right.
or whose narrative you look at. But and then after the emergence of Islam, Persia was the first nation to fall, and they became Islamized in 30-40 years fully. And the present-day region of Israel, etc., was taken over by the Muslims.
I was going to ask you: is Iran doing all of this because, like, Putin has this old USSR dream? Iran has this Ottoman Empire that it wants to reconstruct.
One could look at it that way. Look, Iran historically was a great empire.
Yeah.
Iran wasn't the Ottoman Empire; it was the Persian Empire.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. The Turks are the Ottomans.
Yeah.
The Turks have these outsized ambitions of recreating the Ottoman Empire.
I don't think the Turks are so strong right now, right?
Not much, not really. But they have these big ambitions. The Persians probably have the ambition of recreating a bigger Persia.
Yeah.
And so everybody has these outsized ambitions. I'm not sure if Putin wants to recreate the USSR. I think Putin is a realist. I don't think he's a crazy guy the way he's made out to be. He's a very realistic person. He's a very sane person. He's a very grounded person. I don't think he's a crazy man the way the media sometimes likes to portray him.
He killed all his emotions when he was in the KGB.
Oh, you want to survive there? You got to. So Iran has all this going on, and they want the destruction of Israel. Israel is an undeclared nuclear power. They are alleged to have between 80 to 120 nuclear warheads. We don't know exactly what the number is, obviously, because it's never been spoken about.
And Iran has more?
Iran, I would say, I would suspect that Iran has probably gone nuclear by now, maybe 5 or so nuclear warheads. They have been enriching uranium hexafluoride for decades now. Okay, since the 2000s at least. And by now they would probably have enough fissile material for maybe about 5 or maybe 10 nuclear warheads.
So you're saying it's still small from a power projection standpoint as opposed to Israel.
But if you can deliver even one of those,
yeah, of course. That's why they punch above their weight. So technically they're not less powerful than Israel.
Well, they used to punch above their weight even when they had no nukes. Even now we don't know if they really have nukes, but I'm assuming they may have a few. So there is that. So the Iranians... And Iran has an old grudge with the US. So there was this, in the 1950s, there was this Iranian leader called Mohammad Mossadegh, who, before he came to power, British oil, etc., were plundering Iran's oil resources. Mohammad Mossadegh comes to power. He nationalizes the entire oil industry in Iran, which means that he buys it back from he evicts the Western companies, pays them whatever they had owed for that, and he buys it back for the nation. So he takes control of the oil resources, oil reserves of Iran. Now, obviously, that's very naughty, very bad. So there is a coup, just like what happened in Dhaka.
Right.
Okay, there's a coup. Project Ajax or whatever they called, the Americans called it. So the Americans have this guy expelled, taken out of power, and he dies shortly after. And they install a puppet, the Americans, called the Shah, the Shah of Iran. So he is an American puppet, and he tries to westernize Persia. And Persia becomes reasonably prosperous for some time, but the entire oil output goes to the US and the West. And then in 1979, there is another revolution, the Islamic Revolution. Khomeini comes to power. The Shah has to go in exile.
Yeah.
And ever since 1979, there's been an Islamic regime in Persia, in Tehran.
Orthodoxy again. Yeah.
Yes. And they evicted an American stooge from Iran from power. And they also took the American embassy. They stormed the embassy, and they took a number of diplomats hostage, the entire hostage crisis, which they made movies about, Argo, etc.
Yeah, Argo, yeah, with Ben Affleck, yes.
Yeah, Ben Affleck, etc. So all that happened. So that's why the two nations are very hostile, the US and Iran. The Persians called the US Shaitan-e-Buzurg, the great Satan. Okay. So you will see all the graffiti on the walls over there, propaganda graffiti and so on. So and Israel is very much the most pro-Israel nation in the world is the US.
Correct.
No matter what Israel does, they have the full support of the US.
Yeah,
they have been able to win multiple wars because of American support.
So one question that emerges from there is, I thought when between Biden and Trump, there would be some dissimilarity in their support for Israel. I was very surprised that Biden condemned Hamas, Trump condemned Hamas, and then Kamala Harris, the new presidential candidate, she also condemned it. I was like, that's so interesting.
The US essentially has this blanket support for Israel, unconditional support for Israel. And generally, we will see that it doesn't really matter who comes to power in the US, whether it's the Republicans, whether it's the Democrats, their foreign policy never changes. It's always the same. A little bit cosmetic change may be done, a little bit of tweaking here and there, a trade war here or trade war there or whatever. But overall,
pulling out of a few deals, that's it.
Some small things here and there, to make it look like something has changed. Yeah. But overall, it's the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change. The overall foreign policy never changes. So it's essentially a uniparty state, the US. See, the US is a two-party system. Just one step above North Korea and China, which are one-party systems. And in the US, despite having a two-party system, the foreign policy is the same. The economic policy is the same, and so on. So that tells you that the US essentially, overall, is an autocracy masquerading as a democracy. I mean, a true democracy is something like India, where you have hundreds, thousands of political parties. Every ethnic group, every village has its own political party. Every religion has 15 different political parties. When it comes to the US, where's the political party that takes care of the interests of the Latinos, of the Hispanic people?
There's nothing.
Where's the political party for the blacks? Where's the political party for the Native Americans?
I don't think they think like that. They think it's probably very regressive to have.
Yes, it's very regressive to think like this.
Yet they also do the same vote bank politics that India does. We do it on caste. They do it on color.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you have all that, So coming back to the West Asia situation, Israel is currently embroiled in this entire thing. Earlier this year, they took out a couple of Iranian generals in Damascus. So the Israelis did an airstrike on Damascus, on the Iranian consulate, I believe, in Damascus. It killed a couple of high-ranking generals, IRGC generals, Revolutionary Guards, and some other people as well. In response, the Iranians retaliated by launching a massive drone and missile strike on Israel. Hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, all that. Most of these drones and missiles were taken out by the Iron Dome system of Israel and by nations like Jordan, etc., which are allied with the Americans. And some of these drones and missiles did hit some targets, but nothing of value was damaged. No high-value targets were taken out. So it was essentially, you could consider that to be a failure. A failed attack by Iran. But at least they got to claim that we have responded and now things are done. Now, the Iranians have claimed that now what happened is that the highest ranking politician in Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, he had visited Tehran recently to attend the inauguration of the new Iranian president because the previous president died in a helicopter crash. So, Haniyeh attends the inauguration of the new president, and a few hours later he's dead. And the Iranians say that the Zionist regime, which they call Israel, did some kind of drone or missile or airstrike in Tehran and killed one guy, Ismail Haniyeh. So if that is true, what they're claiming, then it means that it's a humiliating slap in the face for Iran, because Israel can kill anybody anywhere within Iran. even a high-ranking person like this. So that is one possibility. Some people are also raising the question whether it is the Iranians who did this, who had this guy killed, so that they can, take the war to the next level.
So they justify the attack.
Yeah, but there's been no attacks thus far by Iran on Israel in response to this.
Yeah, from what I know, the Shin Bet has already built a bunker for its high-ranking, for everyone in Israel it was in the high-ranking official positions because they are
Anticipating
an attack.
Yeah. So as you can see, tensions are high. The Iranians have vowed to respond, to retaliate to this. I'm not sure how they can respond. So let's look at what can Iran do. Like you rightly mentioned, there's a distance of about 1,000 kilometers roughly, give or take, between the two nations. Now, Iran doesn't have a powerful air force. They have old fighter planes. And those planes cannot do the 1,000 kilometer journey, do an airstrike and come back safely. Can't do that. So they can't use the Air Force. That's out of the question. What they can do is they can launch another drone strike or missile strike. But once again, that will be mostly neutralized by the Iron Dome system of the Israelis. Now, then what can Iran do?
Proxies.
There we go. So you're going to see more tensions.
So, but okay, then what I find fascinating is this nation of Lebanon. We know Lebanon has its own complicated history. Many ethnic groups, many Christians, Druze, Muslims, a ton of people live there, right?
Yes.
Lebanon has its own problems. But Lebanon, at least in the 21st century, has, according to me, I could be very wrong, has never been considered to be a nation that is very militaristic or a nation involved in border skirmishes. Sure, it has attacks done on it. But Lebanon taking up arms against Israel, right? Lebanon typically is a hub of tourism. People go there a lot. Americans visit Lebanon a lot. I have had numerous Lebanese friends in my time in college in America. Lebanon going up against Israel, what does it mean? And surprisingly, the news about Russia helping Iran. What does that all mean?
Okay, so Russia is encircled by the US to a large extent. The NATO expansion has been relentless. They have come all the way to the borders of Russia, and there's the Ukraine conflict going on right now. It's like a long war situation, very slow progress, but there's a war happening in Ukraine. So Russia and NATO are kind of at war through the proxy nation of Ukraine. There is that's going on. The Americans have imposed every conceivable sanction on Russia. It's failed, but the sanctions are in place. Then there is the trade war between the US and China. Okay, China is increasingly coming under the US squeeze. The Chinese have a 25 or so year strategic agreement with Iran, in which China will invest about $400 billion into the Iranian economy in exchange for getting tremendous amounts of Iranian oil and energy at discounted prices. There is that. Then in the Ukraine war, the Iranians have excellent drones. They manufacture drones like the Shahed 2 loitering munition suicide drone, and they have been supplying these in very large numbers to the Russians. The Russians are using these drones, Iranian drones, apart from other drones as well, on the battlefield in Ukraine. So there is this tie-up, and go back to Syria. In the late 2000s, early 2010s, the Americans tried to effect a regime change in Syria. Their proxy was ISIS.
Yeah.
They tried to take out the Al-Assad government. The Al-Assad government nearly fell. The rebels were, the terrorists, ISIS, etc., they were about a few kilometers from the presidential palace. Then Putin intervenes. He sends his reinforcements. He establishes a naval base in Latakia. He establishes an air force base somewhere else nearby. And because of Putin's support, Syria doesn't fall. And Al-Assad is still in power. And Iran is also an ally of Al-Assad and Syria. So you can see multiple convergences happening over here. And now the Iranians are supplying drones to Russia. Russia is supplying various other kinds of possibly material to Iran. Fighter planes also, probably the Sukhoi 35 maybe, or whichever one. Whichever specific fighter jet. I don't remember which one it is. But those will be supplied to Iran, which will significantly bolster Iran's offensive defensive capabilities. So if you look at the Western commentators, they are saying that there is a Russia, China, Iran, North Korea axis at play right now.
Yeah.
These four nations are part of an axis against the free world, which is the West, the rules-based world order, etc. And they obviously want India to take a side.
Yeah.
So there is that. So that's how Iran is involved in this matter. So if there is a war between Iran and Israel, you can be pretty certain that there will be some kind of Russian support and Chinese support to Iran in some way or the other, either covert or overt. We don't know, but there will be something. And one hears that in the past few days, past week or so, there's been a tremendous amount of Russian aircraft landing in various parts of Iran.
Yeah, that's in fact, from what I read yesterday, I believe one of the heads of security or of external affairs, some big head of state, some big head of defense from Russia met the Iranian.
Sergei Shoigu himself, the man himself. Yeah.
So that means it's trouble is a brewing, and so which begs the question. I see that Russia is a very pro-militaristic nation capable of fighting 2-3 wars at once. I don't know how it's doing that. What are the relations between Israel and Russia?
It's an interesting relationship. Russia has its own Jews. Most of the Jews, the Russian Jews, Ukrainian Jews, were I think they were sent to the West in the 1970s, 1980s. Many of them settled down in the US. Some of them settled down in Israel, etc.
And there's many Jews in Ukraine as well, right? Zelensky himself is a Jew.
Himself is a Jew, yes. So there is that. And overall, Russia and Israel have a reasonably, you could say, cordial or reasonably good working relationship. But of course, Israel and the US are hand in hand. The best of allies, the most unbreakable alliance you can ever have. So that obviously, shades the relationship between Russia and Israel.
So now it's
It's kind of, you could say it's not a very cordial relationship right now, kind of hostile. And it depends on the game that Israel plays right now in West Asia. So if there is a war between Israel and Iran, for whatever reason, if that actually happens despite the big distance between the two nations, then you can be pretty much assured that Russia will take the side of Iran.
What does Russia stand to gain from a religious conflict between Muslims and Jews?
Nothing.
It does not care about religion.
Russia doesn't care about religion. Russia cares about Russia's national interest. What are Russia's interests? So Russia is kind of isolated right now in the world. The entire Western world is anti-Russia right now. Much of the global South is kind of ambivalent. India is under tremendous pressure to disassociate itself from Russia. So Russia has very few friends right now. Iran is one. Friends, there are no friends in geopolitics. There are partners and allies. With Iran, there is a kind of partnership, maybe some kind of alliance, quasi-alliance. With China, there is a modus vivendi. China and Russia are long-term adversaries. But right now, they have decided to postpone whatever adversary.
Man, it's a Game of Thrones.
Yeah. And India and Russia are the two nations that genuinely don't have any differences as such. So Russia needs as many friends, let's say, as it can have.
So it will even treat treaties with Iran.
Of course. And Iran and Russia have an old relationship that goes back quite some time. So the Russians will seek to expand their sphere of influence as much as it is possible. So, one of the reasons why the USSR fell is because it became isolated. It was cut off from the global shipping routes. One of the ways of cutting Russia off from the shipping routes is the various choke points in the oceans. You have Japan, the Japan-Korea region, which is always icebound. So if you want Russian ships to go out into the Pacific Ocean, you have to go through certain choke points that are monitored by the US. Japan is under US occupation. So is South Korea. So the US presence is over there.
Wait, sorry. You were talking about a democratically elected government is actually under US occupation?
Of course.
You're saying Japan is also a vassal state for the US?
100%. Let me explain why. Okay, let's talk about Japan briefly. Okay.
But it's considered such a paragon of progress.
I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Let me explain why. The Japanese constitution was written in 1945.
After the World War?
After Japan surrendered in World War II, after the nuclear tests in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So who wrote the Japanese constitution?
Sorry.
Yes.
Why do you call them nuclear tests? They were actually nuclear attacks.
They tested the bombs on humans. That's what happened. So, okay, you may disagree, that's fine.
But No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just thinking about the framing.
Yeah.
So you're basically saying is the US wanted to see if it could potentially enact nukes, right? To see, the world hadn't seen a nukes ever again, right?
Yeah.
In the history of the world, there's only been 2 nuke attacks.
Yep.
Correct? It's US testing nukes in Japan.
Yeah, essentially. Essentially, that's what it was. Okay. So the tests happen. Then Japan surrenders. Then the Japanese constitution is written in 1945. Who wrote it? The US military wrote the Japanese constitution. And not a single word has been changed since 1945 in the Japanese constitution. You can't change it. After that, what happens? The US military officially occupies Japan. Okay? And then in the 1950s, 60s, there are multiple treaties between the US and Japan, treaties of alliance that can be interpreted in multiple ways, which state that the Japanese government is pleased to ally itself with the United States, and it welcomes and requests the Americans to have military bases in Japanese soil to protect Japanese interests. And as a consequence of that, the occupation is now an alliance. And if you look at the map of Japan today, you will find that there are more than 130 permanent US military bases on Japanese territory.
That's insane.
130, more than 130. And a similar number in South Korea. And when it comes to the Bank of Japan, they cannot take any major decision without consulting the US generals.
The bank.
So
of Japan. Even the economy is...
When it comes to Japanese foreign policy, military policy, and economic policy, it is all, approved by the US.
So no wonder when Americans find that their own automobiles are failing, they get Japanese automobiles in the country.
So Japan is a great success story, but it all of its technological progress, whatever they're doing, it's completely open to the US. The Americans can get whatever they want anytime they want. Okay, so it's essentially serving the US. It's serving the US. And in the 1980s, when I was a little kid, I remember the Japanese economy was the monster economy. It was on track to surpass the US. And then the Americans tweaked a few interest rates and things in the Bank of Japan.
Some nice little lobotomy on the
nation. The Plaza Accords, they call it. And that's when Japan slowly goes into recession. And today, Japan is still in that same recession. It is now under threat of becoming a middle income nation.
It's going to get poorer despite progress.
Japan has been one of the highest income nations for the past many decades. Now it is possibly going to become a middle income nation. The total fertility rate is about 1. To have a sustainable population at the same level, at the same rate, you need a TFR of 2.1 children per woman. Right now, the Japanese TFR is close to 1. So the Japanese population is collapsing. It is getting older and older. The average Japanese person must be 56 years old right now? Yeah. So it's a disaster.
And then you talk about a book like Blue Zones where you compliment the Japanese for living very long. Man, like I have to say before we go on further, your grim assessments are making me realize that perhaps geopolitics is a way to look at life itself.
It is. It's about being realistic. It's grim because it's just the truth. Okay, I don't like to paint a false, happy, colorful picture. It's just the way the things are right now in the world. I am a realistic person. I'm a pragmatic person. I prefer to look at things the way they really are. And most assessments will go counter to this. But tell me, if somebody disagrees with me, let them go and find out how many military bases are there in Japan, US military bases. Is that a number? It's just a number. Numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
Japan is under occupation. So is Germany, so is Italy.
So then one question, which superpower in the world, or I would say like आपके power projection के हिसाब से, which semi-superpower is completely non-complicit with the US?
The Russians.
No, but barring the Russians.
No one.
No one else.
No one else.
Everyone is under the US hand.
That's why it's a unipolar world right now. The US is the sole superpower. What do I mean by superpower? Superpower, in my definition, means a nation that has the ability to intervene militarily anywhere in the world at 60 minutes notice. That's what I define as a superpower. There's only one nation that fits the bill.
Does the US have bases in India?
No.
That's very good for us.
I'll tell you what the US has. They have a gigantic base, which is called Pakistan. They are alleged to be paying about $80 or $100 million per week to the Taliban in cash, which means Afghanistan is also their proxy.
$1 billion per week in cash?
Million.
Okay.
About $80 to $100 million in cash per week to the Taliban. So Taliban is a US proxy. The Pakistani army, which runs the country, is a US proxy. Now Bangladesh is a US proxy. The Americans have a major naval and air force base in Diego Garcia, which is the southernmost part of the Maldives region, which is not far from India. And now they will have a base very soon in a year or two in the St. Martin's Island in Bangladesh. And they will have a new nation called Cookie Land, which will emerge in the next maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe sooner, which will again be a US proxy. So they don't have a military base in India, but they have encircled India.
I always thought it was China we needed to be careful about. So, Abhijit, then my question is, I'm actually kind of proud of India right now for being able to resist
Indeed.
outposts from such strong, ambitious players in the world.
Yes.
How did we do it?
How did we do it? Yeah, good question. Look, we are one of the few sovereign nations in the world. If you look at sovereignty as a number, where one is fully sovereign, India is about one.
Just right there.
Just right there. There are 4 fully sovereign nations in the world. One is the US, obviously. The second is Russia. The third is China. Fourth is India.
That's it.
That's it.
So, what about Brazil, Germany, France? None of that.
Compromised.
All compromised.
Let's talk about Western Europe. Most nations in Western Europe are either part of NATO or the European Union. If you are a member of the European Union, in the European Union, you have pooled sovereignty, which means that your fate lies in the hands of Brussels. They will decide your economic policy.
A small country known for its chocolates.
No, it's not the nation. It's the headquarters of the EU.
I see.
A small group of people in Brussels.
Yeah.
Okay? So they will...
Sorry, just that's why all of a sudden in the power rankings in the world, the head of the EU seems to always go up and up in rankings out of nowhere.
Whose proxies are there is the question. So the EU, it determines the economic policies, immigration policies, etc. of all the member nations. And the people on the ground in the nation can't do a thing about that. Okay? Secondly, there's another thing called NATO. In NATO also you have pooled sovereignty, which means that your nation, if you're a member of NATO, you first have to change certain things within your country to be eligible to be a member of NATO, which means that you are already seeing interference in your domestic affairs. Once you do that and you become a member of NATO, your armed forces come under NATO command. Entirely.
So if I wanted to make a move, say I have some Muslim immigrant problem happening in Spain and parts of France.
That's a police matter.
Okay, that goes to the police.
That goes to the EU. Now the EU will decide what your police will do. And the NATO command will decide what your military will do.
So you're just saying, for me, I can't wrap my head around this. The elections are bogus. The
Everything
heads
is
of
bogus.
state, all of these like shows of might, all of that. I can't even use my police without consulting the EU as to what to do on my streets.
The policies are determined by the EU. So blanket policies, like how do you treat immigrants? If there is a riot, whom are you going to punish? Whom are you going to disregard? Whose actions will you disregard? All of that essentially comes from Brussels. And you see that everywhere in Europe, the same patterns, the same policies. Don't you see that? Welcome to reality, sir.
So I still can't wrap my head around this. So there are only 4 real sovereign nations. There is no one else.
Okay, let's talk about France. France, you could say, has a quasi-independent foreign policy because they have their own nuclear deterrent, which is entirely within their control. Their nuclear deterrent is always at sea in the French nuclear submarines.
So we were on the topic of sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
Right?
I was talking about France, wasn't I?
Yes,
France. Rolling?
Yeah,
we're rolling.
Yeah.
So if you consider the nation of France, it has a quasi-independent foreign policy. It has its own nuclear deterrent, which none of the other European nations have.
They don't have nukes?
Well, I'll tell you what. The British have nukes. The British nukes are placed within nuclear submarines, but the delivery mechanism is American missiles. So the big red button isn't there in London. It's somewhere else across the pond, across the Atlantic. The big red button. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So remind me, Abhijit, whenever I'm traveling abroad to give you a phone call so that I treat the nation accordingly. Because I always mistake, facades for reality. Anyway.
So when it comes to France, they have their own nuclear deterrent. They have their own nuclear missiles and submarines. And they have always chafed at being a part of NATO. Okay? So they even removed themselves from NATO High Command or something for a few years in the 20th century. But now they're back part of it.
Yeah, they can't. They're surrounded, right?
They're surrounded. But so that's the deal. So France has a kind of quasi-independent foreign policy. And France and India have a good working relationship. Yeah, the French have significant territorial interests in the Indian Ocean region. They have the island of Réunion, which is French. They have various other islands, which have historically been Francophone islands and so on. So they have a significant, constant naval presence in the Indian Ocean region, and that works well for India. So India and France are cooperating in a variety of ways beyond the US ambit. For example, we have a bunch of Scorpion submarines that the French have manufactured. I'm not sure if they've transferred much of the technology, but at least we have the submarines. We have the Rafale aircraft. We did not go for the American planes. We went for the French planes. And there is some talk about jet engine technology transfer, perhaps, if we pay a high enough price to the French. So India and France have a good relationship. France is among the NATO and EU nations reasonably more sovereign than the others, but not fully sovereign.
What about Germany?
Destroyed.
Destroyed?
Germany is just like Japan. It's under US military occupation. Their constitution has been written by the Americans or by Germans under the supervision of Americans.
After the World War.
After the Second World War, there are permanent US military bases in Germany. One is Ramstein. Have you heard of
the band Ramstein? Yeah.
It's named after the military base. Okay, and so on. The same goes for Italy. And the German economy is the engine that drives the European economy. But to drive an economy and to have rapid economic growth, you need cheap energy. Because it is energy that drives the economy. And the Germans had this source of cheap energy, which was Russian gas. And you may remember what happened to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Kaboom. Blown up. So now the Germans no longer have access to Russian gas. And their economy has gone into a recession. And as a consequence, the whole of Europe is the economy is kind of in the doldrums, not doing well at all. And there is the immigration issue in Europe, which is being engineered somehow.
Engineered by who?
One wonders. It's all military-aged men coming from certain parts of the world, generally West Asia or Africa, that's pouring into much of Europe.
Well, I would assume one would point a finger at America, but America would not tamper with its allies so severely, no? Who else would it could
So
be?
when the Americans think of Germany, I imagine they still see those marching boots and those Hugo Boss uniforms. And that's always been a worry for the Americans.
Yeah, but they
the rise of
do it on
nationalism.
sentiment, no?
No, it's not about sentiment. It's about a real threat. Germany still has a little bit of nationalistic sentiment. So what do? See, one of the major ideological points in Nazi Germany was the supposedly superior race of the Germans, right? The master race, the so-called Aryan race. They stole our term. The only Aryans are Indians and Persians, by the way, but they stole that term. So it's about the Übermensch. It's about the superior man. So how do you destroy that? You bring in immigrants and have them racially mix. It's over. End of story.
So it's still America, you think?
I mean, I can't. Who else could it be? See, these immigrants are coming from parts of the world that are controlled by the Americans. If you look at ex-ISIS fighters who are pouring into Germany, who have poured into, it's been known. There have been images, pictures of a guy, an immigrant posing at some train station in Germany, and there is an image of the guy holding something in his hand and doing this. Okay? In a past life. Same guy. So there have been ISIS fighters who have settled down in Germany, and there are military-aged men coming from various parts of West Asia, even nations like Afghanistan, who are settling down in various parts of Europe. So it's all about changing the demographics, re-engineering the demographics of Europe. See what's happening in UK and London, etc. as we speak right now. There's a rioting happening here. The natives are trying to push back. But
So they should.
Yeah, but what did the Prime Minister say?
He said he will deal with the extremist elements, and he meant his own
citizens.
People.
Yes.
Yeah. Very unfortunate, by the way. Like the Islamic capture of the UK is so severe. It's so much that, I remember that they first took the universities, and now that you're on the streets, and the average Britisher, which you often see as a horrible stereotypical trope of someone who has yellow teeth, always drinking beer, and sort of slightly racist, if those people are your last line of defense against immigrants who are clearly radicalized, the UK is in very bad shape.
The UK is in very bad shape. So is the rest of Europe. So yeah, it's dire straits for Europe, and I don't see anything changing soon. And if things don't change soon, then it's permanent.
And what about all of South America? All complicit with the US, all waiting for...
That goes back to the 19th century or early 20th century. The Americans had something called the Monroe Doctrine, which said that the European nations, European colonial powers, were no longer allowed to interfere in the politics and affairs of South America.
Yeah, and mostly Spain and Portugal had a substantial chunk because most of South America speaks Spanish.
Yes.
So it was a major outpost for Spain.
Yes. So for Spain and Portugal.
Yeah.
So those were then verboten, and the Americans took over. Initially, they were not capable of enforcing that ban. So initially, it was the British who were working with the Americans to keep the other nations out, other European nations out. But then the Americans built their armed forces and all, so now they're in complete control of the Americas.
The entire continent of South America is
Yes,
American.
essentially, under their control. And they have done coups and all. Pinochet was their stooge in Chile, and there's been stuff in Argentina as well. And all the cocaine wars, whatever happened in Colombia, Medellin cartel, Cali cartel, the drug wars in Mexico. Tell me something. The Americans have the best law enforcement in the world, the most powerful law enforcement in the world. They have the best surveillance apparatus in the world, the FBI, the CIA, etc. But if you go to the US today, and drugs are illegal, right, in the US?
Yeah, some are decriminalized, but the hard
let's talk about the illegal drugs.
Yeah.
You go to any street corner in the US, you're going to get drugs. Every single American has access to drugs on demand.
Yeah.
So if it is illegal, and if they are so good at law enforcement and all that, how come there's drugs flooding the US all over the place? How is that so? It's because they want this to happen. That's the only answer. The US probably is the world's most corrupt nation, even though the corruption is not that obvious.
It's like I keep getting Twitter messages from these people who claim to have been part of CIA programs or like been psyoped by the CIA, and I always think ye koi conspiracy theorist hai, pagal hain. But I at least have to entertain after this discussion that perhaps the US runs wars on not just military fronts, but on all cultural fronts, right?
Yeah.
All kinds of fronts.
Yes.
So which, ultimately, to wrap up our discussion, let us now go to the US. The world is often embroiled in seeing US politics as a mockery, as a reality show. We often, that is why perhaps, fail to see all of these nefarious things happening in the background. Let's go to Trump's assassination attempt, right? Some people are saying even that was doctored, but I would say Trump wouldn't risk it.
No.
If you could, this perhaps goes beyond geopolitics. Do you think the US deep state wanted Trump killed?
Good question. So I have said this multiple times on my live streams that I was surprised that Donald Trump was not 1963 while he was president. Okay, 1963 is Kennedy.
Yeah.
JFK. So I said I was surprised that Donald Trump wasn't 1963 while he was president because he was doing so many things that went contrary to the establishment's desires.
Yeah, the deep state, the way security and establishment would like the world to run.
Yeah, drain the swamp, which means target the deep state, right? Change the way things are done in Washington, which means target the deep state, target the powers that be. Look, the US is the kind of nation, you have Joe Biden, who's the president, you have Kamala Harris, who's the vice president. Do you think those two individuals are really running the country?
No. They're not sovereign at all, right?
So,
everything they say off teleprompters, they have no real power.
So then the question is, who's really running the US? Somebody is running the US. So that's what people allude to as the deep state. There is this unelected, extra democratic, extra constitutional power center in the US. We don't know who that is, who the individuals are. We may kind of guess at it, but we don't know. And they're the ones who run the US. Now, when somebody like Trump comes to power, and he tries to do things very differently. He wants to build a wall with Mexico, which means no drugs will stop flowing into the US. That's a disaster for the way things are run. He wants to change the way NATO is run. The NATO members need to pay more money to the US in exchange for the defense that the US does.
He puts America first, period.
He puts America first. And these guys don't want that. So what essentially happened during Trump's first 4-year term is that he was foiled at every step. He was not able to achieve any of the things they wanted to achieve. He could not build the wall. He could not do he could not drain the swamp. He could do nothing. He was impeached a couple of times. His own party members voted against him. Everybody was against him. So he simply failed as president, not because he was incapable of doing anything, but because he was foiled. The entire system worked against him. And now if he comes back to power, the same thing may happen. The question is, will Donald Trump come back to power? So after the assassination attempt, let's address that. So he survived the assassination attempt. Are we rolling?
Yeah, we are rolling.
Okay. So Trump survived the assassination attempt because he turned his head. And you cannot fake that from that distance.
Yeah, it's even a method actor couldn't pull that off.
No, you could not.
Stuntman.
Yeah, and that's, there's so many variables at play when you are shooting a bullet at that distance. There is airspeed. A simple gust of wind can, if you're trying to stage manage something, a simple gust of wind is a factor that's completely out of your control, and it can have the guy shot. So I don't think Trump faked this thing. It was a genuine assassination attempt. He's very fortunate that he survived this thing. Okay?
And kudos to his balls for going like this.
Yeah.
Fight.
Genuine physical courage was demonstrated by him.
Yeah.
People always say that he's full of bravado and swagger and no real substance. The guy showed what he's made of over there. He nearly got killed, but he stood up and he was willing to take another bullet. Yeah. So that has changed the sentiment in the US. And Trump, I would believe, is the front runner to win the election if the election is a free and fair election.
Oh, there's that as well now.
Look, you can manage lots of variables, lots of factors in an election.
And what do you think? See, another problem that I think I have now is, as some people were saying on Twitter, his great sacrifice, which is almost losing his life, is going to be forgotten because the election is so far away.
Well, you can engineer the media and social media and all that in such a way that it's never forgotten. It's always front and foremost in people's minds. That iconic image, I think Facebook, etc., tried to remove that image, right?
Oh, there's a whole, my God, the complicitness of the media, these social media websites. You search Trump assassination. By the way, I ask all the viewers to look it up. Search on Google Trump assassination. As soon as you search it, the search results will stop showing.
Yeah.
Google will typically do suggestions, right? When
Yes.
you say Abhijit Chavda, they'll say Abhijit Chavda name, Abhijit Chavda geopolitics, Abhijit Chavda YouTube channel, Abhijit Chavda podcast, right?
Yeah.
Trump assassination, no results show up.
Yeah.
And then the only headlines that show up, and I could be wrong, is the ones that frame it in a way so it doesn't look like an assassination. And you can clearly see that these big organizations are complicit in who really is running them.
Yeah. So that is the reality. So it may happen that people may forget about this eventually. But if the Democrats manage the things properly, then that won't be forgotten. You keep that image front and center in people's minds. Then people won't forget. The question is, will this happen again? Will somebody try to take a shot at him again? Because the election is a few months away. It could happen. And then, so if you ask me, do I think Trump will come back to power? I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely. I think it's Kamala Harris who's going to be the next president. Yeah. I may be wrong because behind closed doors, if Trump kisses the ring, then it may work out for him.
Yeah. And he's not someone who would likely to do that.
He is unlikely to kiss the ring and bend his knee. But if he does that, if he makes a deal with the devil behind closed doors, with the right kind of devil, with the right demographic or whatever it is, then it may work out for him. He's
always had his way in life. I've read Trump's books, and he's someone who's seen his billions go away and have it come back.
Yes.
He's had a few lobbyists helping him, whatnot, but largely he's been an independent man, which is unlike the stooges of Washington, like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, right? Like always in bed with lobbyists. So, I mean, I like Trump for his personality and what he represents, of course. But what is pertinent for all viewers is, what does it mean for India, right? What does Kamala Harris mean for India? Indians have a very stupid habit of seeing some Indian heritage. They see some Indian heritage, they start hoping all kinds of grand things. They're like, oh yeah, she's Indian, 1/8 Indian. They see G.D. Vance's Indian wife, they're like, oh my God, we're going to be so great. They see Sundar Pichai, they're like an Indian. And they don't, for some reason, Indians stop having logical thoughts when they see a shroud of Indian ancestry.
We are so emotional, aren't we?
Yeah, we're so emotional. We think that, the Indic Renaissance is happening across the globe, right? So then my real question is, say if Kamala Harris comes to power, right? Do you think she's going to have the same, she's just going to continue Biden's policies with India, right?
Yes.
And if Trump comes to power, is he going to follow the isolationist, America isolation route?
I think if Trump comes to power, he will try and change the foreign policy in a variety of ways. He is going to negotiate new trade deals with every major nation, which will put America first. He will impose tariffs on nations that don't toe the line or bend the knee. He'll try to do that. But that is fine. That to some extent he may succeed in those things, but overall the deeper economic and foreign policy won't change. They won't allow him to change that. So when it comes to US regime change operations, they will continue unimpeded wherever they are needed. When it comes to US, whatever else they do in the world, let's say Trump decides that we will withdraw from Japan. Won't be allowed to do that. He won't be allowed to do that. Let's say Trump decides that we will no longer support the Bangladeshi, the East Pakistan new regime. He won't be allowed to do that. It will still happen despite.
He won't be allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the class monitor is really just a fictitious role.
There you go. So it won't really change much for India. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who comes to power in Washington. The foreign policy doesn't change. So sometimes, depending on the Democrats or the Republicans, there is small changes. For example, the Republicans have traditionally been kind of more amenable to good relations with India, better relations with India to a certain extent, but not too much overall. So George W. Bush, he is the guy who sat down with Manmohan Singh and signed the nuclear agreement. But at the end of the day, what was the outcome of the 123 agreement? Nothing. So there is all this optics and all, and a little more bonhomie, but there's no real, sizable outcome, concrete outcome.
Finally, then, and this is sort of more about life in general. Because you have I will now refer to you as geopolitics as philosophy for life, because it really has cleared a lot of cobwebs in my mind. I would like to ask you then, because you do this so well and the people of India and abroad look to you for answers when it comes to geopolitics, I really think you are the one who's penned the term and made it accessible to the masses on YouTube. Kudos to you for that. How has looking at geopolitics changed the way you live your life, changed the way you treat relationships, changed the way you see everyone else? Do you see everyone else as competing powers furthering their interest? And I mean, how do you implement this philosophy in your own life?
You can't use the exact same rules in your personal life, because at the end of the day, when it comes to close family, you cannot be geopolitical in your relationship with them. Simply strategic and coolly calculating and logical. Sometimes especially when it comes to your very close family, you have to often put them first and no longer look at your interests. So sometimes you do self-sacrifice and all that. But overall, when it comes to business, for example, it follows the exact same playbook as geopolitics. You have alliances, you have competition, and there's nothing personal involved in this. Yeah. There are no emotions at play in this. If you become emotional in your business dealings, etc., you are a fool. Right? So the same calculations, the same logic, the logic of strategy, the logic of tactics, all of that applies in business, in sporting events, the same way it applies in geopolitics. So if you look at it that way, if you look at the world in a simple, rational way, from a strategic and tactical perspective, if you know the difference between strategy and tactics, and grand strategy, etc., and then ideology also comes in. So it actually makes sense of the world. It makes decision making easier because it is all algorithmic to a certain extent. So yeah, you can certainly, why do business people read, for example, Sun Tzu or the Arthashastra? Why do they read that? Because the same stratagems of warfare apply in business strategy and business dealings. And not just in business, also in sporting events. For example, I remember in the early 2000s, there was this Australian coach, John Buchanan, who Shane Warne had a big feud with.
Right.
So John Buchanan used to quote Sun Tzu, and he used to implement those stratagems in test series and all that.
And Australia, did it help Australia?
Oh yes, Australia were invincible at the time. Yeah. So yeah, there is a lot of convergence between geopolitics and business, geopolitics and life in general.
Perhaps a book is due then, Abhijit.
Maybe. Let's see.
No, because I think it's very fascinating. I think right now what's happening is, at least in business discourse in India, lots of very talented entrepreneurs are emerging, but I think I see a lot of emotional takes. And I don't see too many emotional takes from our foreign contemporaries who are cutthroat when it comes to business, right?
Yes.
Warren Buffett is pumping out all of his dollars in the stock market and keeping cash. He's not sentimentally talking about how great an Apple is as a company, right? So perhaps if we could, any general tips for people in business who could maybe use geopolitics to their advantage, or any books?
I don't know what books, because there are no real books on geopolitics. I've learned geopolitics by studying history. When it comes to business, you need to know what you stand for, what your objective is, what your long-term goal is. And then Assume you have succeeded. Let's say I have this 5-year goal that my business will reach this so-and-so stage and I'll be able to do so-and-so things. Assume you've done that. You're 5 years down the line and you've achieved all that. Then reverse engineer that. How did you reach there from where you are today? And you simply do it in a practical manner.
Yeah.
And whatever conflicts you may have with other business people or whatever, you have to approach them strategically, not emotionally. If someone is competing with you, it's not because he hates you or she hates you. It's just because you are in the same pond and you are both sharks and you are after the same things. So it's natural. It's just the law of nature. So don't get emotional about it. You can even cooperate with them and actually you may come up with a better hunting strategy.
Yeah, or like do a seasonal alliance, like a temporary uneasy alliance till your objectives are met and just call it business.
It's business. Don't take it personally. Don't be personal. Some people take it personally. Some people have personal grudges and all. I think it's bad for business and bad for society as a whole. I think if everybody is purely logical in business and most things, then it makes for a better society. Obviously, you need to be ethical in things. You cannot put ethics aside in the name of strategy and winning. Yeah. I think there needs to be a balance of things in society.
So then one problem that emerges is that oftentimes, even when people have alliances in business purely so that they can make more profit and sometimes wipe out competition as they should, the issue of egos comes in. So I'm not going to talk to you about business and egos, but instead I want to take a different tangent. Have foreign policies and national interests been compromised by the egos of leaders in the world?
It's happened often. Yeah, egos. I mean, let me think of some examples.
Because many people thought that the Russia-Ukraine war is Putin's big ego coming out.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's not about ego at all. It's about, NATO had given the Russians an assurance that if the USSR, which was breaking up, if it allowed East and West Germany to reunite, if it did not stand in the way, then NATO would not expand eastwards even 1 inch.
That's the fall of the Berlin Wall? That's what it represents?
Yes.
Okay.
So if the Russians allowed this, then NATO would not expand eastwards even 1 inch. That was the assurance that was given verbally, not in writing. And once this happened, then NATO started expanding eastwards. And once it comes to your own border, that is the existential threat for Russia. So I think Putin waited for too long before he acted. This is not about ego. This is not an egoistic decision. You can see ego in the fall of various dictators. Gaddafi, I don't think, he was full of himself for sure, but he was kind of a victim. Actually, he was doing a good job with his country. There was good law and order and all that until the rebellion began, which was fomented by the West. You see the same thing with Saddam Hussein. He obviously was kind of an egoistic person.
Yeah.
And he allowed that ego and hubris to fool him. Because he thought that he could walk into Kuwait, take it over, and the Americans had given him the assurance, we'll look the other way. But there was a trap for him. And that led to his downfall. So ego does sometimes play a role in geopolitics.
Very interesting. I have seen that clip of Saddam in the court. I don't know what international court he's walking in where they're issuing the death sentence for him, and he constantly says something and rejects it.
Yeah. He was definitely a brave man, but he lost.
So much for brave men in the world.
Yeah, you got to be smart, not brave.
Well, as always, it is a delight to speak with you. Thank you for clearing the cobwebs in my geopolitical mind.
Thank you for having me.
I have aged by 15 years at least. I am fit for a titular role in some kind of a government committee because I'm of that age now where I'm now looking at government office because clearly whatever notions I had about America as fair and all of these wars as being run simply on a national conscience.
I'll tell you what, before we end. America is doing what America should do. America is doing exactly what a great power, a superpower should do. They are trying to consolidate its power. They're trying to ensure that no other power emerges on the horizon on a long-term basis. That's what every great power does. That's what every superpower does. So we need not begrudge them what they are doing. They are doing what every great power has done throughout history.
If we were in their capacity, we would do the same.
I would hope so. So let's
historically we haven't though, right? That's what you think. That's your contention with India. Is that historically
it depends on what slice of history we're talking about. If we talk about the last 1,000 years, we haven't done anything.
Yeah.
Since 47, we have done nothing. We have had no ambition as a nation We were once a very great nation. We have had huge empires in the past. But the current crop of leaders, they don't have any ambition. They don't have any sense of us belonging to a great civilization. So that's the problem. But the Americans are not doing anything wrong. They are doing exactly what a great power would do, a superpower would do. So we need not become emotional in this. I'm not anti-American. I admire a lot of things about the US.
Sure.
I've
So
been
do I.
there, I've lived there. So I admire the US for what they're doing. And they're doing what a great power should do. If they were not doing this, I would say there's something wrong with them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time. People can follow you on Abhijit Chavda on YouTube. And hopefully I'll see you offline, of course, many times. But at the next great event, this we won't have to title this as Abhijit Chavda Predicts World War III because
I don't want World War III.
I think that's overdone. Every single appearance that you have, even my editors, for some reason, they always say Abhijit Chavda Predicts World War III.
Well, it's good clickbait, isn't it?
Well, we just gave you a lowdown on everything that is happening in Bangladesh, Israel, and India. See you all on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye bye. Sayonara. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.